Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome all to today's webinar offered by Bulletproof Talent on coaching for accountability. I'm Cy Wakeman, and at Bulletproof we absolutely believe that our mission is to restore sanity to the workplace, and a big piece of that is to make sure that the core competency of personal accountability is alive and well in all of your organizations. Today, I want to give you a quick review of what we believe are the 4 factors involved in the competency of accountability, and then give you some tips for how to coach for accountability, how to hire for accountability, and we'll end with a model that will help you drive for accountability. So welcome everybody to the webinar, and we are going to get started. Sorry about that. Just want to ground everyone in our philosophy when it comes to employee value. At Bulletproof Talent, we absolutely believe that we need to go beyond measuring performance to really marry up to the strategies of our organizations. Most organizations right now, in their branding efforts, in their strategy, in their sales efforts, are really focusing on how to deliver value to their customers, to their patients, going far beyond pay for performance or even pay for effort or pay for a task. And although employee strategies are right now pay for performance, they don't marry up at times to organizational strategies. So we really believe the way of the future is to see and measure employee value in a whole different light. So for those of you that know our employee value equation, I'm going to give those who are new to the webinar just a quick review. When you look at employee value, we know it's more than performance. It is performance plus someone's potential. So it is how they're performing today in their current role against current expectations. But it's also, are they growing and developing to ensure that they will perform well into the future? So is that performance sustainable? Is the performance keeping up to date with the demands of our customers, our markets, our technology basis? So when we look at value, it isn't just what you delivered for us in the past or currently. It's performance plus potential. But we know that there are many employees who in the past have succeeded, have been very highly valued employees under the performance model, when in fact you look at their total value to the organization, and there are some definite withdrawals from the value that they add. So they may have some great technical skills, some top performance. They may be very adept at keeping up with the times and staying current. But if that particular employee is emotionally expensive, they may subtract more than they add in that value equation, because what we know in looking at this equation is that emotional expensiveness has 3 times the value of either performance or potential. So when you want to look at an employee's value, you not only need to look at their performance, you need to look at their potential, will they perform in the future, and you need to factor in, subtract out how emotionally expensive they are. And we believe you need to weight it appropriately so that it's clear that emotional expensiveness is very costly to the organization. In fact, drama is, I believe, a key factor of waste, a key source of waste in organizations. So those of you that are out there focusing on lean manufacturing, lean processes in your environments, one of the things that we aren't taking into account yet, that we at Bulletproof hope to drive the discussion, is the source of waste called drama. So when you look towards coaching for accountability, what you'll realize is that many times our coaching efforts are just focused either on performance, or some of us coach some of our high performers into development opportunities and really to capitalize on their potential. Very few of us are coaching on emotional expensiveness, which is why personal accountability is not being driven down deep into the organization. Emotional expensiveness is something we've kind of kept hands off, when in fact any gain in making someone less emotionally expensive gives you 3 times the value as a gain in performance or potential. And a key piece about emotional expensiveness is that the baseline, the key factor in making someone emotionally expensive is personal accountability. So you can see how coaching for personal accountability is really going to drive bottom line value, making sure that the employee's efforts actually hit the bottom line, whether it's in profits or market share or any other outcome that you're measuring. Because to be emotionally inexpensive, employees need to be fluent in the 5 competencies we talk about often here at Bulletproof. That main competency is personal accountability. We also believe that people need to be evidence-based, fact-based, we call it reality-based in their thinking, that they are not creating drama, that they are really clear that their stress is caused by the stories they make up about what happens to them rather than their own reality. We also know that we need employees that are focused on driving for results and that can deliver on results regardless of circumstances. We need employees great at change, and we also need employees that are really aligned with the organization, that aren't our highest critic, that they aren't working against us, that they really know that buy-in is not something we purchase from them, that buy-in is something that our best employees freely give. So I want to zero in today on personal accountability, because if you can increase personal accountability in your talent through your coaching efforts, you can dramatically change their level of emotional expensiveness, which impacts the amount of value that they add, which directly hits the bottom line results. And that's really what people are hoping from us as leaders and from us in the HR field. So our definition of personal accountability is a mindset that one's results happens because of them, not in spite of them. So basically, it's not being at the mercy of your circumstances. We believe that accountable people choose their own destiny and believe that to be true. So rather than looking at all the ways they were set up or all the ways that they were victimized, accountable people are really accounting for how they got their results and committing to taking that learning and capitalize on it and leveraging it in order to deliver future results. So when we're coaching for accountability, it is very difficult after the fact when you're just trying to hold somebody accountable and talk to them after the fact about their results. To really drive accountability, it's too late. I believe that many of the discussions that are happening around accountability are way too focused on ownership, who owns that result. It's like a performance discussion in that we're talking about something that already happened. Many times that leads to defensiveness and blame. People aren't bought in the first place. They're going to have a hard time owning their results. So we've broken out accountability a little different than you might see, but we believe it's so helpful to help you diagnose where somebody could improve during your coaching efforts and really build this competency of accountability. So the first step for us in accountability is commitment. It's the willingness to get results in spite of challenges. It is willing to do whatever it takes. Much of coaching for accountability has to do with what we call the close. And that close is asking for commitment. So what are you committing to? And one of the things you'll hear as a theme during this coaching webinar on how to coach is that coaches are not about telling people what to do. In fact, feedback has a limited place in coaching. Coaching is about asking questions that drive self-reflection and asking questions that drive action. And a key question is, can I count on you? What are you committing to? And that drives a lot of other questions that we'll get to in just a little bit. So the first part of coaching for accountability is really focusing on someone's commitment, what they're willing to do. The second piece is resilience. You're really looking for problem solving and that ability to stay the course in spite of obstacles. Someone might be willing, but at the first hardship, they jump ship step down rather than step up, and then make up a story about why they had to. Perhaps their boss didn't give them all the information they needed, or priorities changed in the middle. Or so after you get someone's commitment, they're willing, that's what they give freely, the next step in your coaching is to really work on developing their problem-solving skills and their resilience. And that's an important piece to really help people understand that there are always many more choices and options than they saw initially. The third part of coaching for accountability is ownership, and that's where when you do have experiences, you can help people truly understand where their choices were, what they assumed, what they denied, what their part in this was, so that they can accept the results of their actions, good or bad, without personalizing it, without defending it, without justifying it. It is truly just looking at the facts and the evidence and saying, this is mine. This step is so important because the ability to account for how I got results gives me this incredible empowerment, which is the ability to respond differently into the future. So many people are trying to empower others or engage others by giving them power, when power without insight really is a big issue. Great power is if I have the insight to know exactly how I can impact in the future, I then am empowered to really my destiny and deliver results for the organization. So I really think it's important that we're changing our view on what empowerment is. Empowerment is what comes with insight because it gives us the power to respond differently. Once we have insight, that begins our continuous learning, where we then can take insight and build it into plans for our own development. That insight that my lack of project skills leaves me at risk for delivering projects late. Once I get that insight, my continuous learning, my development plan becomes get fluent in project management, which involves reading, taking courses, being assigned to projects, shadowing great project managers, having mentor relationships, actually being on projects and processing that with my boss. Continuous learning and development that is not tied to this cycle of accountability that starts with absolute willingness, ability to problem solve and stay the course, ownership, which really leads to great insight. If development plans are not tied to that, they are simply assignments from bosses that don't really develop others. And here's where I think our development cycle is broken when it comes to accountability, is that accountability needs to drive development planning, where the person actually feels ownership of their development planning and they have a sense of why it's important and why it isn't just an opinion of others of what they need to do or something the organization's requiring. Many people want extra pay for their own development efforts because they aren't owning that this is their spot for improvement. This is their next step in being able to deliver and results and deliver value to the organization. So continuous learning ends not only with a development plan, but with a commitment, which puts us right back at the top of the cycle of someone being willing to really up their game, take full ownership, and really move into a greater level of capability. So when we think about coaching at these levels, it's important to break things down because many people coach just on ownership, where they want somebody to take ownership for something, but they are working either with the unwilling or they're working with people who aren't resilient and truly believe that they would have done a great job had it not been for pesky circumstances, or they don't mind any failures for learning and future results, which just creates a situation where the same issue is repeated over and over again. You'll know if this is happening if you are dealing with the same issues today in your organization that you were dealing with last year. It's a key measurement to know how hardwired accountability is into your organization. Am I still talking about the same issues we had a year ago? That's a great sign that you aren't tying this together with 4 steps. So as we've talked about before, the process for developing accountability, I just want to review quickly and then I'll talk about the coaching process, is that personal accountability does not come with coddling people or trying to perfect their circumstances or trying to make things easier, softer, clear things off their plate. Personal accountability is developed beginning with challenge, getting people a bit uncomfortable, calling people to greatness, overwhelming them a bit, making sure that they are properly challenged. And that is another key place we tend to fall down in today's leadership, is we're buying into the story that people's jobs are too big and they're too hard. As a leader, you need to understand that people's jobs are not too big or too hard. The pain they're feeling is that they haven't adapted the way they're doing their jobs to their new realities. So begin with challenge, help them experience accountability. That is that they feel their own natural consequences, so you don't protect them from that. We're going to talk about models for feedback and feed forward. Coaching sessions need to be much shorter than many of you imagine, because a big part of coaching is allowing for self-reflection. It's a very important piece. I find people want to bring folks in and do an hour-long coaching session when in fact coaching should really get very simple, very focused on a single thread of development, and should give time for the person to go out, self-reflect, talk to others, really have some time to process through the information. And then sense-making mentoring is making sure that while you're pushing on them as their leader to step up, that they have some other place to go that will echo your viewpoints, that will encourage them, instead of stepping down, to step up, instead of blaming circumstances, to really get what they came for and figure out what their lesson is. We talked more extensively about this in our last webinar, so if you want more information, go out to the Bulletproof Talent website at bulletprooftalent.com, and you can get our last webinars pre-recorded. You can get that out there and really hear about the different factors of accountability and the process by which accountability is developed. I want to really move into some specific ways to coach for accountability. As I said, coaching needs to be all about asking great questions. That's good news for a leader, because you don't have to know how to do a lot of things. You don't have to know the answers for your employees. You need to just be a great facilitator of questions. Coaching sessions need to happen often. They need to be lots of mini conversations that are echoing a single theme for one employee, rather than these massive sessions where we talk to people quarterly or once a year. We do this huge download on them. They have multiple things to work on, and then we leave it be for a while. Performance management systems are not working for that very reason, is that when you put something on project status to develop in, you need to hit it with all resources. It needs to be a singular focus, and it needs to be a ton of conversations so that you can use your daily activities as an example of how this theme plays out over and over and over again in your life. Some basic ways to coach for accountability, and then I'll get into a more formal model. I'll give you some of my favorites. John Miller's Personal Accountability, The Question Behind the Question book, gives an incredible basis for moving people just in time, in the moment, from blame to accountability. And it simply takes a look at what questions people are asking. So there are so many opportunities on a daily basis for you to coach for accountability as people come up to you in frustrated modes saying, hey, do you have a minute? I've got a question. Why doesn't anyone tell me anything? Or why do things keep changing? Or when will they finally get it? These opportunities, when people are most frustrated, they're frustrated because their questions they're asking aren't useful questions. They're frustrated because of these questions, they're seeing themselves as a victim and helpless and not having any impact into the circumstances. Frustration is not from their reality, it's from the mindset with which they're viewing reality. If you are told that there's absolutely nothing you can do and you have to just sit back and watch a movie, it is a stressful event, especially if in the movie things are happening to people you care about. The best way to remove stress and increase happiness, morale, and engagement at work is to lead people into accountability, which then they take action. If you measure happiness and stress levels, you will find that they're not correlated to what people's reality is. They are correlated to how much accountability people take for their own reality. So if your workforce has a bit of low morale, it is not your job to go out and try and perfect their circumstances. It's your job to drive accountability. So as you hear questions like this, why doesn't anyone tell me anything? Your response is not to jump into answering these questions or storytelling or BMW driving, bitching, moaning, and whining about the circumstances with your employees. Your job in coaching is to call people to great over and over and over again through questions, through helping them change mindsets rather than change circumstances. So when you hear people asking victim questions, your first call to greatness is asking them to rewrite those questions using what or how, using an I and some action. So why doesn't anyone tell me anything? Encourage your employee to say, you know what, I don't want to spend some time there. That question is coming from a place that really is blaming others. It's not accountable. What would be a different question that is about your accountability in here? And helping that employee rewrite that question to, what can I do to get the information I need? When you've got an employee that can move from anyone tell me anything to what can I do to get the information I need, you have moved them by simply rewriting the question out of victim into potential accountability and action. My coaching then is really simple. Once we have a good question, I put all the onus back on the employee. What are 3 things you could do to get the information you need? And I tend to be very routine and ask things the same way, using the same model, keeping it very simple. That routine teaches employees how to think in ways that actually drive for results. So I would say, what are 3 things you could do to get the information you need? Now, many employees might say, well, I don't know. That's why I came to you. That's a cop-out. I just let people know I've got some time. Let's keep thinking. I'll stay with you for a little bit. Once they find out that you're keeping them accountable by your sheer presence and your willingness to stay with the question, people tend to step up. They'll come up with 3 things. You know, I can go to meetings that aren't mandatory. I can read the intranet. I can check the standard operating procedures. I can, you know, ask questions. Once they come up with 3 things, I have them write that down, and I let them know that feeling uninformed, these are their simple instructions. This is their go-to list, that they are completely in control and not dependent upon anyone else for information. They can find their own information. I also let them know that that's their new development plan, that they need to be focused on becoming self-sufficient in finding their own information. That makes the next coaching session really easy. I run into them again intentionally, and I say, how's it going? And they tell me, you know, oh, it's okay. I just simply say, what was it we were working on last time? Because I don't need to remember that, they do. It's their development. They might say, I was frustrated for not getting the communication I wanted, and say, what did you commit to? And by the way, one step I left out after they came up with the 3 things, and I said that's their development plan, you need to close that 5-minute interaction with, are you committing to this? And that's a yes or no question, or what are you committing to, so that they really take it on as their commitment. So when I see them again and I ask how it's going, they can say a little bit better. I say, great, what did you do to make it better? Well, I really scoured my emails. I've been doing that on a regular basis. Perfect. And then you tie down the learning as a leader. Be very clear those are connected, that you will be more informed when you take responsibility for your email. Somebody might say, well, I couldn't get on the internet because IT wouldn't give me a password. They never called me back. Tie it down. How's that working for you? Are you getting the information you need? Well, no. What did you try to get a password? Well, I called them. They didn't call me back. What are you committing to next in order to get a password? Just keeping people moving into what can you do, how can you help, and what are you committing to? It's a great technique. When people are frustrated with change, instead of talking about why do things are changing, it's what can I do to get great at change so I'm unfazed by it? What can I do to support the change or understand the change? When will they finally get it? It becomes, what can I do to provide great information to help them better understand our perspective? What can I do to better understand their perspective? This is a quick coaching technique that I find very, very useful. The bottom line to this coaching technique is, if you remember nothing else, what can you do to help? Because we need in our coaching for accountability to get people to stop judging and start helping. Half of our coaching time is spent hearing someone's judgment or story or frustration about others. We need to conserve that energy. We need to focus that energy into results. A great way to do that when somebody is tattling on somebody else is just to say, stop, what do we know for sure, get to the facts, and then ask, what could you do next to help? How could you help? If people aren't seeing that, when they're tattling, ask them what they did to help. What did you do to help? And many times they say nothing. What can you do now that would add value? It's these questions that stop the drama and start driving people towards action. Another key technique in coaching for accountability is to move people out of or, into and. There's some big power in and. When people see themselves as victims, they see their choices very limited. So people might say, do you want me to make sure this goes out today, or do you want me to make sure it's right? They're coming to you in frustration, and the use of the word or indicates they're in a non-accountable mindset. So another way to move people quickly into accountability is to find where the or is and to make sure that you're replacing it with and. Many conflicts, people see their interpersonal conflicts as or. You know, do you want us to do it Sharon's way, or do you want us to do it, you know, with quality or whatever that might be? And there's some and. It's like the two of you need to get together and figure out how you can have a way that's comfortable for both of you and ensures the highest quality. So that's just another technique I wanted to make sure that you know about. A technique I've already mentioned for people into drama is that great question, what do you know for sure? Another technique for leading teams into accountability, and you can use this for individuals, is when you are working in teams on projects or rollouts or initiatives, or even just upping the ante in their everyday work, use your team meetings not to focus on what happened and why they didn't get the results they wanted, but to get very clear about what results they did get and where that lines up towards what their goals were and what their expectations were, because you need to be very honest. I mean, call this the accounting for exercise. I like to highlight in front of the team what the goal was, to give them an accurate statement of what their results were, and to throw it out in a team environment to say, I want everybody to go around and tell me what contributed to the results. Many times, the first couple of rounds, you will find people blaming others. Well, marketing let us down, or senior leadership what they needed to do. Let that go on for just a bit, and then go back to each individual and ask them to rephrase what they just said using the words I chose, I denied, I assumed, I did, I didn't, stay away from the shoulds, but I needed to have done X. That can take marketing didn't get it up on the website on time to I did not work with marketing to ensure that deadlines were being met. That ownership piece, this team accounting, leads right into continuous learning. What do you need to develop in order to do a great job in the future of driving results with marketing? What are the skill sets? People then in a group are all focused on themselves, focused on their own development. So instead of having all this judging going on and all this bickering, it ends it by just saying, I know I have that skill deficit. I want to improve in that. And it will lead to a nice feed-forward exercise I'll talk to you in a little bit about how then people can ask for help on those issues. To get more formal about the coaching process, we need to understand how human behavior changes. Human behavior, it's rare, if you want to help to change somebody, it's very rare for you to have a conversation with them about something they didn't know about themselves, and in 60 minutes or less for them to radically accept what you're saying to be the truth, become very aware and owning of what it is you're presenting to them, be able to immediately put a plan together to change it, go back and consistently do that in the workforce, and then reap immediate consequences. That is many times the illusion that we're coaching under is we think we're going to have a conversation or two and then behavior is going to change. Those usually are times that we've been silent for so long, and now we are trying to fast track those changes because it's last-ditch efforts in order not to fire the employee. True coaching really understands the change sequence. If you start at the top of the slide, there should almost be a 0, because where everybody starts out, especially when it comes to places in which they are in a victim mindset, right, that ego's taken over, by definition, when somebody is a victim or doing ego behavior, they have a blind side, so that 0 should say clueless. We all start out our improvement efforts at some point in our life on each topic as clueless. We absolutely are convinced of our own story that it's not about us and it's about everybody else. I work with leaders all the time that are so frustrated their employees won't buy into the change efforts, and they are completely clueless that when they roll those changes out, they themselves are the ones that make buy-in optional by, throwing their boss under the bus, saying things like we have to, and I'm so sorry, and I know we're all really busy. They create that, and yet they're clueless. So everybody starts out with some level of cluelessness on each issue. The first many conversations are just simply to get someone aware that they have that particular development need. Now, I would tell you that most people become aware first that you think they have that need. That is awareness. Before they move into true awareness that they have that need and acceptance of it. It's one thing to become aware. It's another thing to really get comfortable with, that's true. I struggle in that area. Until somebody is aware and accepting of their development needs, they really have motivation to act on them. There are also people who are aware that they have needs and not motivated to act on the situation. We've all met those folks. They just say, oh, you know, that's just my personality. I'm not that good at change. We have left a lot of people in our coaching with awareness but not motivation to act. Motivation to act comes out of natural consequences that we don't protect people from. You can't motivate another, but their own circumstances can motivate them. That comes out of honesty from us, and it comes out of consistent input that helps them understand that the results they're getting are because of their own actions, not their circumstances. So the awareness and acceptance relies on a lot of feedback to break through some things they might not see about. Getting people motivated to act is all about moving them into accountable places where they really get that they are the only ones that can change much of their situation. Only when somebody is accountable can they really build a plan to develop differently, and that means they're willing, they're resilient, they own it, then continuous learning happens and development planning happens. Many performance discussions are building plans with unwilling people who truly believe they're set up to fail and that their issue is outside themselves, and that's why we don't see the performance enhancements we would like to. Once somebody is motivated and builds a plan, feedback is not the best tool for them, because now you're beating up on a motivated, willing person, talking to them about the past, which is something they can't change. Once someone gets to 3 or 4, feedback as we know it is not a useful coaching tool. Feed Forward, Marshall Goldsmith's tool, is a great coaching tool because it builds on 2 things. 1, suggestions for the future, and 2, it gets development owned by the individual, and they're accessing entire groups of people, not just their manager or leader, so that they're less dependent on their leader. They own their own development, and the world is their resource. So it is an incredibly empowering, engaging way for people to develop. And then we need to start consequencing people positive ways, which is where reward comes in, reward and recognition. And it's really the only reward and recognition that sticks, because when you've gone through the battle, when you've done the self-reflection, when you've done the hard part about acknowledging you have a development need and you really worked it, getting someone to reward and recognize and acknowledge that is true reward and recognition. Rewarding people just on performance or that they did a good job or rewarding them to try and raise their morale, those reward and recognition programs don't work. The ones that are the 6th step in this stage work. So as we go forward in coaching on this webinar, where I'm going to teach you a quick feedback model, but that feedback model is really only used stages 1 through 3. After 3 and accountability happens and continuous learning, then you want to use Feed Forward. So let's talk about what those 2 models look like. To give you the most basic way to give feedback in case none of the rest of this sticks is I just like to tell people what helps and what hinders and let them know I need more helping, less hindering. Many people don't realize what they're doing is hindering. They actually think it's helpful. So many employees think that when they tell you why something won't work, they really believe they're helping keeping the organization safe and on course, when in fact that hinders. What helps is us focusing on how we could make it work, how we could risk mitigate. What hinders is when you point out all the reasons something won't work. What helps is when you point out risks and then how we can mitigate them. It's the most basic form of feedback to give people in real time to keep them between the ditches. It's always setting the expectation and asking for what you need, and it helps move them out of that clueless and lack of awareness stage, because many times people think they're helping when they're actually hindering. So that's a basic one. A little bit more sophisticated feedback model is a 4-step model. Starts in the box in the left-hand upper corner and actually works its way around clockwise. In giving feedback, less words are more, or less is more, I should say. You need to say out of your story, you need to say out of your interpretation or assignment of motive or your understanding of the situation. Feedback is something you need to deliver very clearly without a lot of words, and then you need to ask people for their commitment to consider the feedback, to walk with it for a while, and to just see what part of it could be true. Sometimes you need to coach people on lack of defensiveness in getting feedback, but that's a topic for another webinar. In giving feedback, here's how it goes. What works, what inspires you about that person. Starting in this box and just putting a single item here, actually a single item in all of the boxes, keeps things focused on one issue at a time. But starting with what works does two things. One, it gets you out of judgment, seeing the person more as a whole person. The other is that it sends people a message that you're not the enemy and that you see them not just by what the one issue is you're going to talk to them about, but you really get them in a safer place. To do this, however, it needs to be a sincere statement. So if I'm talking to a physician who tends to be very passionate about making sure their patients can get what they need, but does that in a way that's fairly destructive, using loud voice and some bullying techniques, I might say, Dr. Smith, what I really am inspired by is your passion and dedication to your patients. And I would really mean that, because if I had to choose a physician, this physician might be the exact physician I would choose as my patient advocate. And his real name isn't Dr. Smith. Then I would move to box 2 that would say something like, what's not working yet. And yet is very important because it implies hope. It implies that this is a fixable condition. If someone's high functioning, we might say, what I need you to work on next is, and what that does is it's great, and now let's move to the next level. But with him, I would say, what's not working yet is your current approach to rescheduling visits with specialists. Go to the third box, is what's missing is a lot of questions. Help me understand, and this is where you ask some of my favorite questions. When you're calling that specialist, what's your goal? And he might say, my goal is to get my patient in the door as quick as possible and not have to go through all the red tape of them waiting. Then my next favorite question in this line of questioning is, what's your approach been? Get people reflecting on their approach. If he has insight, he might say, well, if I'm talking to the nurse and they won't give me what I want, I hang up on them, I page the doctor directly, I complain to them about their nurse, and then I insist that my patient be seen, and I won't take no for an answer. If he's not very insightful, if he's like, well, gosh, I just try and ask for what I need and be kind to people, I might say, can I give you my perspective? Here's what I've heard, or here's what I observed, or here's what my sense of the situation is. After you ask for somebody's approach, just ask them a great question. How is that working for you? Are you getting the results that you want? And at what cost? Are there changes you would like to make in your approach, and what are you committing to? Another form of that is help me understand what you're hoping for. Help me understand, what you're aiming at. In this third box is also where you can use the QBQ tool, the reality-based thinking tools that we've given you on different webinars. This is where a bulk of the coaching happens, but as you'll notice, I only gave a couple of sentences of feedback in the first two boxes. The rest of the time I'm asking questions. And the last box in what's possible is I'm setting a future expectation. I'm saying, what's possible, Dr. Smith, is that you can truly ensure access for your patients into these specialty clinics by building peer relationships with these folks so that when you call, they're thrilled about getting your patient in, not dreading the call back. So this is a planned out process because I have found to keep these conversations very simple, not wandering, out of emotional blackmail, you have got to really think through what's the essence of the change I would like to see in this person, and you need to name it. And naming it requires some definite time and focus and some prep work. When you meet with somebody again, you're going to take those questions in that third box that I described what's missing, and you're basically going to say, you know, here's what's I'm liking, or here's what's working. I've seen you really change some of your approaches to specialty physicians. Here's what I'd like you to sharpen next or develop in next is that let's go the next step in building these peer relationships, and help me understand what's your current approach been. Did you keep your commitment? What kept you from keeping your commitment? When is this stuff hard? When's it not hard? Getting people reflecting and saying, now here's what's possible is now that you're getting them into these clinics, a great follow-up relationship will make sure that you get your patients back, which has been, you know, one of your chief complaints. When people are willing and accepting and motivated and accountable people that are willing to take ownership can be demotivated by having feedback repeated over and over because they feel as though they've already cried uncle. They've already done the big thing, which is own their development need. When someone owns it and takes accountability, they're at their most vulnerable. And you as a leader coming back in and continuing to kind of harp on it or give them feedback will help them understand that accountability doesn't often pay, that there's no good rewards for accountability. So when somebody is willing and able, I want you to switch your techniques to something we call feed forward. Feed forward is where somebody owns their own development and they get very clear about what it is they want to do. So with this physician example, he got very clear that he wanted to build peer relationships. So once the question's that clear, instead of me as his leader telling him how to do that, which then becomes an assignment, a have to, it's not a project, I would simply assign him the task of going out and asking 30 other physicians or people outside the industry, what is their best tip in building peer relationships? What's their best tip in building customer or colleague relationships? The instructions go like this. I want you to go out and ask that question to 30 different people inside the company, outside the company. I want you to not critique, argue with, or even entertain whether it's possible the suggestion they're giving you. I want you to simply write it down. The first step is just collecting a ton of great ideas. The person you're asking doesn't have to be an expert. They don't have to have perfected it in themselves. You just need one best idea they have, something they've read, something they've practiced, something they've heard about, something they saw somebody else do that worked. The next session then you come together, and that's where the critiquing happens, is you look at the 30 or 100 suggestions and you just ask the person which 3, 4, or 5 of these might work for you. After they choose those, bang, that becomes their next development plan, where then those are Can you commit to these? Let's put some timelines by them. Let's put some action plans behind them. So that development planning is no longer the manager coming up with the ideas and trying to get buy-in from the employee. It is the employee working on their own issues with their own plan, with their own discovery process, their own self-reflection. They are accountable for their own development, and this is really how you hardwire accountability in through coaching. Another technique I like to use with Feed Forward is if everybody on my team has something they're working on, let's say I'm late to a meeting, I want people to go around the table and just say, here's what I'm working on. I'm working on doing a better job of keeping priorities clear. And then they ask each of their teammates, what's your best technique? What's your best technique? And everyone works on person A's development for a while, and then person B talks about what they're developing in, and everyone works on their development for a while. What this does is it gets people to quit judging. One, they understand the person knows that about themselves, and to start helping, which is where you want your team focus to be. So Feed Forward is a great technique to use. Just know you're in the danger zone when it comes to accountability. When you are talking more about a person than you are to them, when you are walking away from conversations with a lot that is unsaid, when you're spending a lot more time thinking about them than actually having them work their own process. In your coaching for accountability, there's a few non-negotiables, and you just really need to insist that your people give others the benefit of the doubt, that they see situations with very generous eyes, that trust isn't something people earn, that they know that trust is something they give. This focus really on the ability to account for and then the ability to respond. The fact that their focus needs to be on their role, not their job. Their role is to do whatever it takes to make sure that customers get what they need, and that your focus and their focus is on bulletproofing themselves rather than trying to change their circumstances. Bulletproof folks succeed on the short term in spite of circumstances, and because they're very fact-based, they get good data on, in the long run, what needs to be changed. Their data isn't corrupted by unwillingness and victim stories and victim mindsets. They see things clearly because they're really focused on the facts, and in the short term, they can really pump out results, and in the long term, they are very clear about where they can impact next. We've already talked about leading for accountability, so I won't go over that again. I do want to talk about hiring for accountability. If you think about the four factors that I've talked about that we know make up accountability, when you hire for accountability, think about what behavior-based interview questions you can use at those four factors. Think about designing situations that really test those out. And in your references, make sure that in those benign references where you're not putting people on the spot, but you're asking questions that give people opportunity to indicate where on a spectrum people lie in their level of accountability. So let's talk about interview questions. That first one, testing willingness. A great interview question is, tell me about a time that you were asked to do something outside of your job description. Let them tell the story, and then talk about how did you respond? How did you make sense of that? What determined your level of willingness? How did you make those decisions? And just really listen for the best answers, which are all about, I get asked to do things outside my job description all the time. I'm here to add value. Use me as you're needed, and that they can tell you very specific examples of it, versus, I went to the union and I pulled up my job description and I went to HR, and people that feel very justified in being right rather than being happy and adding value. When it comes to resilience, think of behavior-based interview questions that are, tell me about a time that you were given a challenge at work that seemed impossible or proved impossible, And tell me about that. And then listen for how they approach barriers. A follow-up question is, in hindsight, are there a couple of things you believe you could have done differently? And see how readily, whether they've even thought about it or how readily they come up with some of those answers. When it comes to ownership, tell me about a recent failure at work. Let them tell the story. And then what was your part in that? Listen for how many I's. I chose, I assumed, I denied. Listen for how they can account for. Continuous learning. Ask them, within the last 3 months, what's the most significant thing you have learned from experience? And really hear what their lesson is, and then really pound for, you know, their accountability in that. When it comes to situation design, be very creative in coming up with ways in which you can frustrate your candidates that are farther down the pike in your interview process, and then really see, one, their reaction to barriers that come up, and how quick they are to own, and then give them a second chance and see if they adapt their behavior based on continuous learning. Basically recreating that. And the same thing goes with benign references, is calling folks up and really giving them an opportunity in a positive way to give you an idea on how accountable somebody is. A benign reference, I may say, you know, all of us have different ranges of what we call internal locus of control. Some people really err on the side of believing they have control or power to impact anything. Some people err on the side of believing that circumstances play a greater role. On a scale of 1 to 10, being, you know, 1, the first scenario where people believe they're in charge of their destiny, and 10, where would you score this person and why? So you make it okay in those reference questions for the person to be anywhere on that spectrum. Don't make it a negative by asking, you know, is this person accountable? Think of questions that you can say, you know, there are times where we are met with undue challenge and barriers. On a scale of 1 to 10, what's this person's tolerance for that? What type of satisfaction do they get out of overcoming really challenging circumstances? So be asking some of those great questions. I want to end with a way to drive for accountability. We call it the results circle. In the book Reality-Based Leadership, there's a whole part of a chapter on this. Really an important model, I think, when you wrap this all together. There is one path where people can get, as their results, reasons, stories, and excuses about why they didn't get there, why they didn't get the results they needed, and they won't have to lie. These will be true. It starts with people focusing on right versus willing. It ain't right that I have to do something outside my job description. This is sick and wrong. It starts with judgment. And when people judge, what they're saying is, I'm the victim, somebody else is the villain, and I am helpless. Right after deciding that someone's right about something, they become righteous, and all learning stops. And if you remember, that's the last really way to cinch the deal when it comes to accountability, is that continuous learning. So when someone is all about being right, they're not committed or willing to do whatever it takes. They aren't being resilient. They aren't being, they aren't owning, and they move quickly into blame. People that believe they're right and blame others find people to collude with, people that will reinforce their story, people who believe like they do, so that they're immune from feedback because they find other victims to collude with them, that the problem is outside themselves. And when we're giving them feedback only about once a year in the typical performance scenario, it is not enough connection between what they're experiencing and their own behavior. It is easy to negate with a victim mindset. For people to be truly accountable, for people to really get results rather than reasons, stories, and excuses, it has to start with a willingness to not only be willing to do whatever it takes, it's a focus on being willing rather than being right, but being willing to absolutely declare that and be upfront with that are willing to step aside and say, this is up to me. That ability to account for that we've talked about both in coaching and that team accounting for exercise, once I am committed and open about the fact that I am signing up for this thing, I am giving you my buy-in, I am saying yes, rather than focusing on whether it's right or wrong, and I don't mean ethically, I mean in my own mind, right or wrong. Once I do that, then it becomes easy. I have the ability to account for I got there. I now have the ability to respond differently. When you are outside of the blame and the collusion and the victim stuff in your organization, people step up and give you two things. One, they give you their best individual contribution. They're not afraid of being curve breakers anymore. They're willing to step up. They know that if they take risks, the only danger is learning, because we simply look at our successes and failures, account for how we got there, respond differently in the future, make new commitments, and raise the bar. A culture that's full of blame negates people stepping up in their individual contribution because they are going to get judged and blamed for the outcome. In this way, you make it easy for people to have stakeholdership and engagement because it's a natural condition that comes out of accountability. And here's how you end up then with results or learning our future results. So as we close today, I hope that you found the techniques for coaching for accountability powerful ones. Go out, try them on for size. Keep joining us for our video coaching tips, our webinars. And know that today's level of accountability in your organization determines the future results. So today's accountability determines tomorrow's results. So if you're not hardwiring accountability into your workforce, your strategy to get future results is simply one of hope. I hope it works out. I hope things fall in our favor. It's a high-risk strategy. Step up as a leader. Really focus on accountability. You'll increase your engagement, you'll increase your results, and you'll increase the happiness of your people. Any questions, you can follow up with me through email, cy@bulletprooftalent.com, and I look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Thanks.